Hello, Ken.
Hello, Catherine.
Good morning to
Good
you.
morning. Good evening to you.
Thank you very much. Once again, I would like to thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart to have accepted to make this presentation to us and to have selected such an attractive topic. I'm sure that it is magic. So I'm very happy. And I would like to ask you whether you allow me to present you in Greek.
Please.
Thank you very much. Γεια σας. Χαίρομαι που σας βλέπω πάλι στην διάλεξη αυτή του μηνός Φεβρουαρίου. Σήμερα τη διάλεξη θα μας κάνει ο κύριος Cloke, που είναι μεγάλη μας τιμή να είναι σήμερα μαζί μας. Ο κύριος Cloke έχει έρθει πολλές φορές στην Ελλάδα, για πρώτη φορά το 2011, στα πλαίσια μιας εκδήλωσης που έκανε μια ομάδα με το όνομα Mediation Beyond Borders. Ήτανε πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα αυτή η εκδήλωση. Κάναμε συναντήσεις με αξιωματικούς της αστυνομίας για θέματα μεταναστευτικού προβλήματος και για διάφορα άλλα. Ήτανε πραγματικά πολύ επικοδομητική η εκδήλωση αυτή. Λοιπόν, να σας παρουσιάσω με δύο λόγια τον κύριο Ken, διότι έχει τόσο μεγάλο βιογραφικό. I say, Ken, that you have such a long bio that it is not possible to say everything about you, but I have selected the most important, to my opinion, items. So, ο κύριος Cloke είναι Αμερικανός, είναι διεθνούς φήμης διαμεσολαβητής, διαιτητής, εκπαιδευτής, coach, σύμβουλος, εξειδικευμένος στην επίλυση περίπλοκων πολυπρόσωπων διαφορών, διασυνοριακών, οικογενειακών, εργασιακών, δημοσίων τακτικών. Αυτό είναι πολύ ενδιαφέρον, το δημοσίων τακτικών, ομολογώ δεν το έχω κατανοήσει πλήρως, να κάνουμε ερώτηση μετά, σχολικών και άλλων διαφορών, κάτοχος πολλαπλών πανεπιστημιακών διπλωμάτων και μεταπτυχιακών τίτλων από το Πανεπιστήμιο της Καλιφόρνια, Berkeley, την νομική σχολή του UCLA, την νομική σχολή του Πανεπιστημίου Yale, το Εθνικό Δικαστικό Κολέγιο του Ρένο στη Νεβάδα και άλλα. Είναι επίκουρος καθηγητής στη νομική σχολή του Πανεπιστημίου Pepperdine, επίσης του Πανεπιστημίου Southern Methodist, του Πανεπιστημίου Saybrook και του Πανεπιστημίου της Νότιας Καλιφόρνια, και παλαιότερα ήταν καθηγητής σε άλλα πανεπιστήμια και πανεπιστημιακές σχολές, μεταξύ των οποίων η νομική σχολή του Πανεπιστημίου του Χάρβαρντ. Ο Ken έχει σχεδιάσει συστήματα πρόληψης επίλυσης διαφορών. Αυτό το οποίο έχουμε πει κάποιες φορές στα πλαίσια άλλων εκδηλώσεων, ότι δεν είναι μόνο να επιλύουμε τις διαφορές, αλλά καλό είναι και να τις προλαμβάνουμε. Υπάρχουν τεχνικές, υπάρχουν τρόποι αντιμετώπισης καταστάσεων, ώστε οι διαφορές να κατασυγάζουν πριν φτάσουν ακόμα στο να γίνουν έρηδες. Ποιος δεν με ακούει, εργάστηκε ο κύριος Cloke σε περισσότερες από 25 χώρες και είναι ιδρυτής και ο πρώτος πρόεδρος του οργανισμού Mediation Beyond Borders, όπως σας είπα και προηγουμένως, με αυτή την ιδιότητα είχε έρθει στην Ελλάδα. Ο κύριος Cloke έχει δημοσιεύσει και 20 βιβλία σχετικά με την επίλυση διαφορών, μεταξύ των οποίων τα βιβλία με τίτλο Mediating Dangerously, The Dance of Opposites, The Crossroads of Conflicts, Mediation in a Time of Crisis και άλλα πολλά. Η θεματική της σημερινής διάλεξης είναι, νομίζω, αρκετά πρωτότυπη. Είναι η μαγεία της διαμεσολάβησης, πώς να την ανακαλύψουμε, να την τροφοδοτήσουμε και να την προάγουμε. Τεχνικές μετατροπής από επίλυση σε συγχώρεση και συμφιλίωση. Εύχομαι να σας αρέσει το θέμα και η ανάπτυξή του. And Ken, once again, thank you very much. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Very good.
Yes.
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 If I am speaking too rapidly, or if you are not able to understand what I am saying, please send me a chat. I have my chat box open, and I will do my best to speak clearly and respond to whatever concerns and issues and difficulties you have with what we will be talking about today. So our topic for today is the magic of mediation. And let me begin by asking everyone here a very simple question. Please raise your hand if you have mediated at least 10 disputes. Raise your hand if you have mediated at least 10 disputes. Raise your hand if you have mediated 50. Okay, so Vicky, you have your hand up.
Somehow difficult in Greece.
I see. Okay, perhaps you had a question. Let me just say this. For those who have experienced even a few mediations, it is likely that you will have some experience of magic. And the goal of this conversation is to try to figure out what that is, what the magic consists of, how to find it, how to feed it, how to foment it. And we have to begin with a difficulty. And the difficulty is that every conflict is different. Every person is different. Each person in conflict is different from moment to moment. And as a result of these three fundamental conditions, it is impossible for anyone to tell you how to mediate. And it is impossible for you to know in advance how you're going to mediate. And yet, we have a set of skills and techniques that we have been taught. And those skills and techniques are designed to create a kind of magic, to turn people who are completely stuck into people who are no longer stuck. How exactly does this happen? And I think we can see that it can happen on multiple levels. So first, I would like to take the simplest possible level, the level that flows from the fact of mediation. And here we can see that the very first miracle or source of magic in any conflict is the resurrection of hope, the creation of an idea that we may not be permanently stuck, and it may be possible for us to become unstuck through conversation. So the very first piece of magic is mediation itself, because what mediation represents is a way out of the trap of conflict, an escape route, a way of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And what that does is it allows people to now adopt a slightly different attitude toward themselves, towards each other, towards the issues, toward the fact of their conflict. So how exactly does this hope get resurrected? And I think the first fact that triggers this magic is simply the arrival of someone who is outside the conflict and therefore able to escape the hypnosis, the circular adversarial assumptions that arise in every conflict. And simultaneously, the mediator is someone who is inside the conflict. That is, who is willing to listen to you, who's willing to allow the conflict to enter them. So where is the mediator in relation to the conflict? In three places simultaneously. One is inside the conflict. Second, inside the conflict by virtue of empathy and listening. Second is outside the conflict by virtue of being capable of bringing perspective to what has happened. And the third place that the mediator is around the conflict, that is, aware of the environmental conditions that generate and create and sustain conflicts. So this is the first miracle, is the miracle of mediation itself. The first piece of magic is the magic of us arriving and saying, tell us what happened. There's a second source of magic out of the fact of mediation itself, which is simply the bringing together of people who do not trust or necessarily like each other. Actually, if I could ask everyone if they, oh, they're very good, muted, thank you. So, it is one of the reasons why we get stuck in conflict is because the only opinion about what happened that we ever have to come to terms with is our own. And to confront some alternative version of what happened, to engage in dialogue, in conversation with our opposite, creates a kind of opportunity for synergy that did not exist before. So simply bringing two people together and having them speak to one another is a second source, kind of elementary source of magic. When people recognize that their conflict is simply a place where they are stuck over some issue, that it's a place where they lack the skill to be able to handle someone else's behavior. That realization also has an internal consequence. And the internal consequence is that we begin to look at what we know about what has happened to us in a slightly different way. The third source of magic in mediation happens by the mediator not only listening, but giving permission to the people who are in conflict to talk about what is beneath the surface of their dispute. And this is a fundamental source of magic in every mediation. And the reason for it is simply this. The more mediations you conduct, the more you look at your own conflicts, the more you will realize that at least 90% of what matters is happening beneath the surface, is not represented by the arguments that we are having. It is a layer, at least one layer beneath those arguments. So how do we get beneath the level of argument? And the answer is by bringing some third person into the conversation who is not in the argument and is able to ask questions that draw people into a deeper understanding of what is happening. And here now I want to introduce a second order of magic. So the first order of magic is simply the fact of mediation. The second order of magic is technique, is what we bring to the conversation. And here I would like to give you a concrete example of a set of questions that will allow us to make a difference, to create a kind of fundamental shift in the way that people are speaking to one another. And what I'd like to present as an idea is that there are three orders of questions that we can ask people who are in conflict. There are three orders of questions that I can ask each of you right now. Order number one, who is the oldest person on this call and who is the youngest? Who is the tallest? Who is the shortest? Who lives the closest to downtown Athens? Who lives the farthest away? Or who lives the closest to Paris and who lives farthest away? Whatever it may be. Notice that all of the answers to each of these questions can be characterized in one way. That is, there is one correct answer for everyone. There is only one oldest person, probably me on this call. And there is only one youngest person, only one tallest, only one shortest. Category of question number two. How old are you? How tall are you? Where do you live? And now notice there is a single correct answer for each person. Notice the shift from the assumption that there is one correct answer for everyone to the idea that there is a correct answer for each person. Category of question number three. What issues are you facing at whatever age you are at? What does your height mean to you? What did it mean to you when you were growing up? What do you love about where you live? What do you not love about where you live? And now notice there are multiple correct answers for each person. Notice the shift. This is a fundamental technique in conflict resolution, which is to ask questions for which there is not a single correct answer for everyone, questions for which there is not a single correct answer for each person, but instead questions that elicit the meaning to you, the multiple meanings to you that are contained within the question. And isn't category number three the most interesting kind of question that we could possibly ask? So if we ask the question, what is the correct way of deciding this issue? The law will give you a single correct answer. If you ask the question, a factual question, where were you born? Where were you on the night of October the 22nd?
To interrupt you, we cannot hear you very well. There are interruptions. Sergei, μιστέμε?
Δεν νομίζω. Το πιθανότερο είναι ότι είναι από τη σύνδεση.
So can you hear me okay now?
Now, yes.
Okay. So let me, when did I cut out? You heard the 3 questions?
No, I missed the second one.
The second question. Question 1, who is the oldest person, the tallest person on this call? Question 2, how old are you? How tall are you? Question 3, what issues are you facing at whatever age you are at? What does your height mean to you? These correspond to 3 fundamental approaches to conflict resolution: the approach of power, the approach of rights, and the approach of interests. That is, the approach of dictatorial forms of power, the approach of legal democracies, and the approach of mediation, dialogue, collaborative negotiation. That is a relationally informed approach to what matters. Instead of determining in advance what matters, we try to discover what matters by asking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what are the questions that we can ask that can make a difference in people's attitudes, in their intentions, in their awareness of themselves and of each other? Here are some questions that you may not have considered in your mediation practice, but here are some questions that may make a difference in creating a kind of magic, which is some deeper realization of what this conflict means to you. Question 1, what question would you most like to be asked right now? What question, if it were answered, would mean the most to you right now? What draws you to this issue? What is your history with it? Why is it important to you? What does it mean to you? Why does it matter so much to you? What opportunities do you see in this conversation that we are having right now? What difficulties or dangers do you see in it? What is missing from our conversation that, if we added it in, could make a difference in coming to a solution? What is one thing I could do that would make it possible for us to communicate more successfully? Would you like to know one thing you could do? Right? So these are some examples of some questions that can be asked in conflict resolution. And there are only just a few of these, but the point of this is to design questions that seek the deeper sources of conflict within people, that attempt to discover why all of this matters, why they're so concerned about it. We can even ask questions like, what question would you most like to ask each other? Why haven't you asked it so far? Etc. So now the point of this is there is magic in these questions, but it is a magic that can only come from one place. And that is the courage of the mediator in being able to ask, giving themselves permission to ask a question, number one, that they don't already know the answer to. And number two, a question that is dangerous because it could be perceived as judgmental, as taking people into an arena of discomfort, of opening up the possibility of change, fundamental change. Catherine mentioned a book that I wrote several years ago called Mediating Dangerously. And the beginning quotation from the book comes from the German writer Goethe. And what Goethe wrote is, the dangers in life are infinite, and among them is safety. So when does safety become dangerous? And the answer is when we play it safe as mediators by not asking questions that could draw people into a place of transformation, a place of fundamental change in their attitudes. Let me give another example of a way in which magic happens in mediation. And in order to give this example, I have to mention an idea from mathematics and physics. And the idea is the idea of a dimension, a physical dimension. So if there are 0 dimensions, there's a point. What is a dimension? And the answer in mathematics and physics is, there are 2 answers. One is, how many pieces of information do you need in order to know where something is located? Second answer, a dimension is a degree of freedom. 0 dimensions, you don't need any information to know where something is at, and there's no degree of freedom. 1 dimension corresponds to a line, and you can move back and forth on a line. That is 1 degree of freedom, and you only need 1 piece of information in order to know where something is located. This corresponds to, my answer is the correct one. All you need to know is what I think. And if you are working with a dictator, dictatorship is a one-dimensional approach to problem solving, to social problem solving, political problem solving. That's all it is. My answer is the correct one. As soon as you move out of that, you begin to have more than 1 correct answer, just like the questions that I was asking before. And 2 dimensions, you have an x-axis and a y-axis, and the x-axis is what I want, and the y-axis is what you want. This will create a plane, and every point on the plane that is not on the x or y-axis will be a compromise. And so mediation frequently works by compromise, which is to say, There is party number one, that's the x-axis. There is party number two, that is the y-axis. And now we're going to try to find some place in between. You want $1,000. You don't want to give them a penny. How about 500? Right? So this is an example of compromise. That is a two-dimensional approach to conflict resolution. What creates depth? What creates the third dimension? And there are two possibilities. One is emotion. Now, we operate in ways at work, sometimes even in families and marriages, oftentimes in organizations, as though people have no emotions, or as though it is possible to suppress those emotions without consequence. This is not possible. Every conflict has an emotional component. And what emotional intelligence offers us is a way of bringing those emotions out into the open rather than sweeping them under a rug, and working with them to turn the emotion in the direction of problem solving. And if we can do that, we harness emotional intelligence and link it to problem solving. Because emotions are a source of information about what is taking place within and around us and between us. A second possibility for a third dimension is what we work with in conflict resolution, in mediation, and that is interests, which is not what we want, but the reasons why we want it. And notice that the three questions that I gave you earlier, the three categories of questions, correspond to dimensions. How many dimensions are there? Well, according to a very famous mathematician, Bernard Riemann, there are an infinite number. How do you create a new dimension? Well, if you are on a line and you want to create a plane, the way to do that is you take a line and you drag it 90 degrees in a brand new direction. And the way to move from a plane to a cube is you take a plane and you drag it 90 degrees in a brand new direction. And from a cube to a hypercube, you do exactly the same thing. What does this correspond to in conflict resolution? It corresponds to asking a question that lies outside the conversation people are currently having. Asking a question that is inappropriate, that doesn't fit, that is drags the conversation 90 degrees in a brand new direction. And that direction is the direction of depth, which we can think of either as emotion or as interests. And it depends on how many dimensions we want to create here. So now the point of this is, what happens if you have a three-dimensional conflict and you're approaching it using two-dimensional methods? And the answer is you're going to get stuck, or you're not going to completely resolve it. And isn't this exactly what happens when the courts try to take on conflict resolution in place of mediation, instead of mediation, and lack the ability to ask the kinds of questions that need to be asked in order to draw people's conversations in a brand new direction? So we can think of the law as a two-dimensional conflict resolution mechanism which is superior to a one-dimensional or zero-dimensional conflict resolution mechanism. But what we want to get to is 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 dimensions and more. How do we do that? And the answer is by digging deeper, by looking for ways of moving the conversations 90 degrees in a brand new direction. That is a kind of magic, because what it will reveal are some of the places where people are stuck. If you are stuck in an emotional location, no amount of logic is going to help you get unstuck. You need a different set of skills, the skills of acknowledgement, the skills of empathy. And those skills have nothing to do with 2 + 2 = 4, or the logic of Aristotle. And if we take a look, if you read Aristotle, I don't know if that's how you pronounce him in Greece, Aristotle, I imagine it might be. But if you read the rhetoric, you will discover that there are 3 fundamental forms of logic. And the main one that I want to identify for our purposes is what is called the law of the excluded middle. The idea that things are either false or true and can't be both. But that's not true emotionally. Things can be emotionally true and false at the same time. Every conflict story is true and false at the same time. Ask yourself this question. When you tell a story about a conflict in your life, if you have a choice between emotional accuracy and factual accuracy, which one will you choose? And I can tell you that nearly everyone will choose emotional accuracy over factual accuracy. Why? Because you want the listener to understand what it felt like to be treated this way, what it meant to you, how you experienced it. You don't just want the facts, you want the story, because the story contains way more than the facts. But if we treat, as the law does, the conflict story as purely factual, we will have missed the fundamental significance of the story, which in fact is a little trail of breadcrumbs or a little thread leading back into the labyrinth that hides the Minotaur, back into the cave, back into the maze of the subconscious mind, back to the place, in other words, where we are stuck. So the magic fundamentally begins with listening, but not just ordinary listening. It is listening in an effort to get to some deeper understanding of what actually happened. And therefore, it requires empathetic listening, because we need to place ourselves in that situation in order to feel within ourselves what it might feel like to be in the other person's shoes. Not what they actually felt like, because we can't know that, but what they might have felt, which then gives us the basis for designing a question, coming up with a question that will find out what is true for them. And what we want to know is not what is objectively true for everyone or what is factually true for them, but what is true specifically right now for them in this moment, and what could be true if we looked at things slightly differently. So this is another source of magic, this search for a different dimension. There are other forms of magic as well. There is, for example, there are a number of techniques that we bring to conflict resolution that are able to unlock conflicts at their source. This is something that we don't actually understand until it happens. Let me just tell you by way of experience. I have been a mediator now for 42 years. I've worked in over 25 countries. I have conducted dialogues, not only assisting in the dialogues that we help to design and conduct in Athens between Greek citizens and migrants, but also in Nicaragua between Sandinistas and Contras, in Ukraine between Russians and Ukrainians many years ago, in between Pakistanis and Indians, between Armenians and Azerbaijanis, between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland. And I have been present in these conversations. And I can tell you that what happens in those conversations is intense and heartfelt and magical. Because what happens is you have to confront the one you hate and discover that the hate is what is inside of you. And when you do that, a little door opens to some deeper understanding of yourself and others, and the ways that you have imprisoned yourself in your own conflicts. So what is conflict? Let's go back to this question. I wrote another book that I think Catherine may have mentioned, which is called The Crossroads of Conflict. Let me define it this way. If we ask the question, who does not get into conflicts? Let me give you two examples. Example one, there are no 3-year-olds who get into conflicts over romantic love. Why? They're not ready yet. It's not an issue. It's not a problem for them. Doesn't even come up. Example two, there are no 60-year-olds who get into conflicts with their parents over what time they're going to come home, we hope. Why? Because they have already figured out how to solve this problem, how to have this conversation without getting into conflict. So therefore, we can define conflict as a lack of skill at being able to handle a problem that is now real for you, that is now present in your life. Let me define it differently. Every conflict takes place at a crossroads that is defined on the one hand by a problem you are now required to solve in order to learn and grow and evolve and adapt, become a better person, have a better relationship, have a better marriage, have a better family, have a better work life. So on the one hand, there is a problem you are now required to solve that you are confronting and being forced to confront. And combined with that, creating the crossroads, is the fact that you do not yet have all the skills you need in order to solve it. And every conflict will take place at that crossroads. So what is conflict? It is a little lesson trying to teach itself to you. It is a piece of learning of wisdom. It is the future of you as a human being, waiting for you to figure out how to bring that future into existence. So conflict resolution is a kind of sacred process because it takes people to a point of choice in their life that is going to define who they are, how they are functioning, how well they are going to be able to adapt and evolve and change with changing conditions. I'll give a small example. Babies, when they are born, engage in what is called parallel play. You take two babies, you put them next to each other, you give them a toy. Each baby will play with the toy, but they won't really play with each other. But at a certain point in their development, the babies become aware of each other and want to play. And now one baby takes the toy away from the other baby, and the baby who lost the toy begins to cry or have a tantrum or bite or kick or whatever in order to get the toy back, which is not going to be very successful in creating a relationship of play with the other baby. So what is required? The answer is a set of skills in being able to handle what is inevitable in that relationship, which is that one baby will be having the toy more often than the other baby. How are you going to handle this? What are you going to say? Well, we've all figured out how to handle that problem. We now know what we're going to say, but we didn't in the beginning. And notice that every conflict that those babies will have will take place in the transition from parallel play to cooperative play. Every one. And isn't this true of all conflict? It all takes place in the transition from lower orders of skill to higher orders of skill, lower orders of relationship to higher orders of relationship. And how do we acquire those skills? Through conflict. Conflict is a message telling us that we haven't quite figured out how to do this. It is something that isn't working for us. To put it slightly differently, here's my definition in organizational settings, in families, in workplaces, conflict, and in society, in politics, political conflicts. Conflict is the sound made by the cracks in a system. And when that system is not working, it generates conflicts simply as a form of friction between two parts that are not working together. And isn't it the same in all of our conflicts? So helping those parts that are in friction figure out how to talk to one another, how to tell each other what they want and need and expect from each other, how to listen, how to be empathetic, how to negotiate collaboratively, and what to do when you're stuck and you can't figure out what else to do. Those are some of the skills that we are describing. So mediation is not just a response to litigation, and it is growing significantly globally right now because as a species, we have not yet figured out how to get along with one another, as we can see taking place at this very moment in Ukraine. Right now, there is war in Europe. And why is this war happening? In part because we have not figured out how to work together in ways that could make that war unpalatable. Now, this is simplistic, and there are many complications, as there are in every conflict. And we have to work through those complications. But here's the secret, and here's the magic. Every one of those complications is an indicator of something that isn't working for somebody. It's an indicator in a relationship of what needs to be paid attention to. So the magic of mediation is simply shifting our attention to what isn't working and trying to address it using a variety of tools that are available to us, mostly tools in kind of trying to find out what the conflict is actually about, what it means to people, how it feels to them. Sigmund Freud described psychoanalysis as the talking cure. I think mediation is the listening cure. And a huge amount of what we do is simply creating an open space within ourselves that allows people to talk about what is real for them, that gives them permission that they otherwise do not have, to say, here's what it meant to me when you did this or that or the other thing. Here's what I would like from you. Here's what I need. Here's what I expect. Here is who I am. Then what we need to do is to create room within the solution for what is unique in each person. I did a mediation several years ago with a very large science museum in the United States called the Exploratorium. And they were experiencing a variety of different conflicts about what to do and how to do it. And we put together a program to design a way for the museum to operate, working with schools in the community in which they were located. And we got people together into 3 different groups, and they came up with 3 different plans. And then we asked the question, which of those plans would you like to implement? And the director of the museum, who was a very interesting and intelligent man, said, no, we don't want to pick one out of the 3. We want to actually implement all 3, because we don't know at this point which one is going to work and which one isn't. So let's wait and let's try all 3 of them and see, because maybe something will happen that we don't know and can't anticipate, and we'll be able to figure out, based on what happens, which of these approaches is the best. And it turned out that that was really brilliant. Now, ordinarily, we think of conflict resolution in relationship to the law. And I know that in Greece, probably all of you are attorneys, or nearly all of you are attorneys, and most of the mediations take place through the legal system. And one of the characteristics of the legal system, one of the reasons it was created, was to give finality to conflict, to end it by pronouncing this one wins and this one loses. And if we approach mediation from the perspective of the law, we can slip into that way of thinking and lose sight of the fact that there may be multiple approaches to solving the problem. So what is magic? The answer is, it is a kind of openness to possibility. It's not just the resurrection of hope. It is the organization of conversations and relationships in such a way as to make room for you, for what is unique about you, not you as a category or an abstraction or a thing, but what makes you unique and what is going to be different about you tomorrow. Is there room for that in the solutions that we create? That's what we are looking for. So now, where do we go with this? And I realize that we have now come to the end of our time here. What I'd like to do is to end our conversation with two ideas. First comes from Albert Einstein. He said, in quotes, "There are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle." I believe in the latter. And I think we need to approach conflict resolution as though everything is magical about it. The whole thing is just one solid piece of magic. And what we are looking for is how exactly do we find it, feed it, and foment it? How do we make it real? And the last idea comes from the Irish poet William Butler Yeats, who said, again in quotes, "The world is full of magic things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper." So every little piece of magic asks us to be more open to possibility, to respond more sensitively to what is happening moment by moment in the conversation we are in right now. That means showing up, not just as a set of logical principles, but as a human being in the presence of other human beings. That's magic. And that's a part of what makes this magic work. It's you and the attitude that you bring towards yourself, towards your process, towards your profession, towards the people that you work with. So I wish you wonderful, magical conflicts. I'm sorry that we don't have time now for questions and comments. I meant to make room for those, but I'm very happy to respond if anyone would like to email me, or perhaps through Catherine, if you have any questions or issues or difficulties. I hope this is very useful for you. And I wish you once again wonderful, magical conflicts. Thank you very much. And thank you again, Catherine, for inviting me.
Αν έχετε κάποια ερώτηση, μπορείτε να την κάνετε. Just say that if they have any question, they are free to answer you.
Yes.
To ask you, sorry, and you will answer.
Yes, I have a few minutes left. And not just questions, but vigorous disagreements.
Κατερίνα, θες να πεις εσύ κάτι μήπως?
Ορίστε. Όχι, δεν θέλω να ρωτήσω, τα κατάλαβα όλα. Εσύ?
Όχι, ομοίως.
Μήπως να ρωτούσαμε την άποψή του για την υποχρεωτική διαμεσολάβηση?
Α, ναι, ρώτησέ τον. Πες του το ναι.
Ωραία. Ken, I have one question.
Yes.
Which not directly.
You're muted, Catherine.
Τι έγινε?
Εσύ με Σέργε.
Ναι, κατά λάθος.
So again, I said that I have one question which is not directly connected to the topic of your presentation, but which is very important to all of us, I think. What do you think about mandatory mediation?
There's a phrase we have in the United States. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I don't know if you have something similar. We can draw people into mediated conversations and require them to meet with a mediator, but we can't force them to agree. There is something fundamentally voluntary about the nature of this process. And what the difficulty with making the meeting mandatory is that the mandatory nature of that meeting can create a kind of resistance in the parties to actually reaching agreement. They come into the session unhappy because they've been forced to do this. So I then respond with a two-part response. One, I give them permission to leave. Two, I beg them to stay. And everybody loves to be begged. So first thing I do is I say, if you really don't want to be here and you don't believe that this is going to be useful to you, there's no point in going through something that is useless, that you're just going to be upset about, and you are welcome to leave if that's the case. And now, let me tell you why I think it would be really, really wonderful if you would be willing to stay and participate. And I will tell them why I think that's important for them. And I'll even ask questions like, how long has this conflict been going on? How much longer do you want it to go on? And if you don't want it to continue, what are your other options other than this? So why not take a chance? You're here. Are you willing to be here voluntarily? So I need to try to shift the dynamic so that the resistance doesn't seep into the agreement creation process. There's a second part of this, which is nearly everybody who comes into mediation is frightened. They don't know who you are. They don't trust each other. They're afraid of what they may say or do, or what the other person may say or do. They're afraid of being drawn back into the painful emotions that they experienced when the conflict began. They're afraid that they're never going to get out of this. How do we respond to fear? And we have to come up with a set of answers. And there are a number of answers, and I've written a short little piece about 20 ways of responding to fear. And what we want to look for is how to turn the fear in the direction of some kind of engagement, some kind of facing of the thing that you are afraid of. And if you're forced to face it by someone who just tells you you have to be there and you have to face it, it can redouble the fear and make it worse. Not always, but often that can happen. And then what we have to do is we have, as mediators, to develop ways of making it okay. Here's one very simple way of making it okay. Tell me a little something about yourself. Where are you from? Tell me about your life, about your family. What are the most valuable and important things in your life? What do you value most in your relationships with other people? Here's one that worked with a group of teachers. Actually, they were professors of education. I'd like to ask each person to introduce themselves and to mention the name of one teacher who made a difference in your life. What did that teacher do that made a difference in your life? And how could we bring that quality and the lesson you learned from that teacher into this conversation we're having right now? And that was what did it. There are thousands and thousands of ways of doing that. What's important is to understand that the compulsory nature of mediation sets a stage for you, and you need to redecorate the stage. You need to reset it. And you're given certain emotions as givens. You need to address them directly. I hope that helps, Catherine.
Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Possibly you will be interested if we describe to you how the Greek legislator has faced this problem, into brackets, of mandatory mediation. Because as you say, you cannot force someone to find a solution. If he does not want, if you force him, the reluctance will be greater, even greater. So the law of 2019 has introduced an initial meeting, which is mandatory and which is considered to have as aim, if I can say, to inform the parties about what is mediation, what are the benefits, what are the weak points, what is their watna, their batna, etc. But the real goal of this mandatory first meeting is to lead people, to have them convinced to go afterwards to full mediation. Unfortunately, in practice, this is not done because many lawyers, most of the lawyers, I'm awfully sorry to say it because I'm a lawyer, do not like mediation for many reasons which are not of essence. And they want to finish this first meeting in 5 minutes, 10 minutes maximum. And this is what we mediators, we try to change. So in any case, this first mandatory meeting has opened a little bit the door to mediation, because there are some cases, especially in family law, which are brought to mediation. And this is very important, of course. But I fully agree with what you said regarding mandatory mediation. You cannot force someone, okay, because if he's reluctant, he will come to the meeting and he will remain stuck. Or he will not participate actively, or he will not be really there. He will be physically there, but emotionally, he will be elsewhere. I can tell you, most probably you are aware of this, I have nothing to teach you, that in France, the High Court of France has ruled that if a person has to be in a mediation, if he is there, but he does not participate actively, and he does not mean it to be there, he is there because he must be there, he has not fulfilled his obligation, which is very correct. Now, speaking about High Court, there is something which came in my mind. We have heard many times that in the United States, there are many courts which have established the system of court-annexed mediation. What is your opinion about that?
The original idea of court-annexed mediation actually was a part of became part of a larger idea developed by a Harvard law professor whose name is Frank E.A. Sander, and it is called the multi-door courthouse. And I like this idea a little bit better because what it says is when you walk into a courthouse, the first thing that you should encounter is a help desk where there's someone who's going to help you figure out, make an assessment of what your needs are, and then figure out where you need to go. Is it to arbitration, mediation, informal problem solving, summary jury trial, etc. Many options available for you to look at and try out. And then whoever that person is stays with you and helps you work with your conflict throughout the life of that conflict. So I think that we are in this moment in time in a transition from power-based methods of decision-making to legal-based methods of decision-making to interest-based methods of decision-making. And we've made the transition largely into legal systems, constitutional systems, systems based on rights. And we are now experiencing a shift in the way that we process our conflicts with one another as mediation begins to take hold. But we haven't yet conceived of ourselves as separate from and in process, in organization, in the way that we operate from the legal system out of which we have grown. So my way of addressing this in the book that I wrote, Mediating Dangerously, is in a chapter called What's Better Than the Rule of Law? And clearly there's something worse, and the rule of law is important. And now what's better than the rule of law? And the answer is a place where people create their own laws through consensus by bringing together people who have common interests, even when they're opposed to one another. But what I'll give well, actually, unfortunately, I have to end a little early, so I'm going to end this part of it. I am on a call with Ukraine in a few minutes, where we're trying to figure out how to protect the mediators who were there. And unfortunately, I need to leave in order to do that. But let me just say this in conclusion. We have not yet come into our own because we haven't yet figured out all of the different things that we can do. And one of the important pieces in that is being able to address conflicts in all their locations, including political conflicts like the ones that are happening now in Ukraine. So thank you for that, Catherine. I really appreciate your comments, and I wish you great success as mediators. Thank you again for inviting me, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much for having accepted the invitation and to have been with us this morning or this evening for us. And I wish you full success in what you have to do now for Ukraine. All the best, Ken.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe. Stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.